Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking, this is probably going to be a long one. This is a genius book, and it's another one of these books that came to me right at the right time, like to match where I was at with my thinking. So this is a special book to me now, The Spectators by Victor Hussenot from Nobrow. Again, one of these older Nobrow ones that I went out and grabbed just because I know that they're not producing books like this anymore, so I have a suspicion that these are going to start going up in price as the production costs get too much, it seems like, for them to produce books like this. But really beautiful cover. Love the image here of this one big character with all of the people inside of it. That's kind of the perfect Leviathan image that's like the key to the whole book. And this nice little kind of foil eye and everything. Nobrow just has such beautiful production. This is such an intense book that I'm going to have to go through it page by page. So I will, or almost page by page. So I will kind of warn you that this is going to be an intense review. But this book came to me right at the right time. You know, obviously we've been thinking a lot about AI, and I've been in my personal life, obviously spending more and more time back being invested in the philosophy of information again because of the AI, and I was watching a bunch of videos with Stephen Wolfram about him connecting Wolfram Mathematica to ChatGPT and what that's going to do for the future of AI and moving us towards artificial general intelligence, AGI, strong AI rather than the weak AI that we have now. And so in those, he's been talking about a physics concept that he came up with that matches what has been for 20 years kind of my instinctive understanding of how the universe works, which is that it's all at the base root computational. Not in the digital sense, but in a quantum sense. That there's a book by Seth Lloyd that was put out in 2007, I think, called The Computational, or Computing the Universe, the Computational Universe, and it makes the argument for the universe being a giant quantum computation, that the mathematics works out that, you know, physics, that you can talk about physics or energy and information as equivalent, mathematically equivalent concepts. So I've always kind of had that idea that at root reality is computational in some sense. Not that we're living in a simulation or anything like that, but just the basic nature of reality is computational. And Stephen Wolfram seems to have had a breakthrough in that concept where he can describe it mathematically and export it up to general relativity and quantum mechanics and stuff and explain them with his computational model. And what he calls that is the Ruliad. So it's basically compute all possible programs, all possible rule sets, and see what they do. And those can all be defined in one big space that he calls Rulio space. So you imagine all possible rule sets being computed at the same time, and then we're just one of those computations, and part of what we are is such that we kind of have slices of the computations available to us coming through our filters. You know, our senses are filters. So we're kind of constrained by a space filter, we're kind of constrained by a time filter, our eyes constrain what come in with light, and so we're interpreting. And this book seems like a very instinctive, I don't want to say that Victor Hussenot knows this or has this theory of the world. Obviously, there's some sense of that very explicitly throughout this. But I think this book is an instinctive, maybe more intentional than I thought, because it's pretty genius and pretty explicit, I think. But it's kind of taking that point of view. Like immediately on reading the first page, I hadn't even got in, like, there's only a couple notes that I went back in and put later. So this is just all unfolding for me as I read it. Like, the note I have to make on the first page is that every mind is an alternate universe. Instead of this idea that there's a multiverse out there, it's like we are in the only one reality. Just the different realities are all the different slices of the different perceptions. So right on the first page it says, each of us sees the city in our own way. And you get these 12 characters here that are kind of shown in these different stages, and then we're going to cycle through them and look at things through the different lenses, and then there's going to be a ton of lens shifts. So one of the things that I've always struggled with this conception that I have of how the universe works is that space is something that is a constraint on us. It's just how we have to interpret the data of existence. And so I've always wanted to have non-spatial metaphors when describing this stuff. Like, you don't want to talk about zooming in and out of different levels of abstraction or something because it's still too spatial. So one thing that I came up with is kind of a lens shift, like when you're at the eye doctor and they change the different lenses and things come in and out of focus, or you could have lenses that filter out different types of light or something like that. So I think that's a better metaphor for understanding the way reality is. You're not moving through space or time, that you can just switch lenses. And this book is a series of lens shifts on a number of different levels of abstraction, looking at the world in different ways. And I'll go through all of those, but the way they're all visually represented and how it all piles up in the book is just really, really intensely interesting. It looks, when you flip through it, like this is a very simple book. It's only got 4 words, a couple simple images, but there's so much in this book. And I was already sitting there thinking about this stuff, and I'm sitting there reading this book like, oh my God, this book is unfolding everything for me. So here you have basically this character who has a lens shift. The mind's eye is set free when he's getting sleepy, and what is interpreted as reality at first, there's a window, there's a person in the window, blah, 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 he starts just seeing it as shapes. And so that's a shift in your lens and a shift in the level of abstraction. You're no longer looking at things for what they are in terms of use value. It's a house, it's a person. You're just looking at it as shapes. And that's the reason that's the first thing in the book, is because it's what artists do, right? That's what I'm teaching my students to do, is forget your use value, forget your cartoon brain, and go into just like a flat screen analysis of like what's on shapes on your retina. That's it. And this shows that lens shift, and it happens within the lens. So I think that's like right out the gate, I'm like, okay, I know what this book is about. It's amazing. Or at least I know what I think the book is about. And then here you have just raw reality. I mean, not raw reality, but raw nature, basically uninterpreted data. Obviously, this all has what I call a content skin to it. It's been interpreted. It shows up as colors and shapes and trees and stuff like that. But then you have man come in, and not only do we overwrite it with the city, but I also think that this is overriding it with consciousness. This is like pre-conscious biotic, maybe cognitive life. Things are moving around, but there's just biotic life. And then when conscious life comes in and kind of imposes its view on reality, you get society. Like, I think that's what this is interpretation of, is just overriding reality, not just with society, but also with consciousness, and that, we then manipulate the world to our own needs. And then you get this series of kind of in-between pages here, which are all really very clever. So you have like ideal man, cartoon man. It's just a representation of mankind, I believe, and looking at all of these different suits that can be put on. And so it's like this God view is going to come down now and see the world from a particular perspective, because even if you were in the God view, you're seeing everything all at once, and it's a different thing. And this book really helped me answer a long-term question of mine too, about the difference between and how to navigate the conflict between like a hive mind and preserving individuality. I've always thought that the hive mind seems like a utopian state, but you have to give up individuality to reach it. So then there's no individual to enjoy it. And then why would any individual want to sign up for that? But I think this book by the end gives me an answer to that question. So I'll answer that later. But here you have like the hive mind coming in, and it's going to find something useful in the individual. So it gets to pick an individual to inhabit, and then see it, put that lens on, put on the lens of that individual. So this individual is describing then walking around the city and sometimes seeing a silhouette in the distance, and talking about how that flattens them. They seem to freeze. They seem somehow frozen in place. And right here you have where there's the silhouette and it's just frozen in place, and like reality's flattened out. And then it says, and then the illusion fades. And so like reality forces a lens shift on you. You can no longer, like if you just take a silhouette, you can interpret it as moving away from you, a static silhouette at least. It can be moving away from you or towards you. You don't have the context. and then reality will provide the lens shift for you. It will provide the context for interpreting the data that's coming in, but the data is ambiguous. So I thought that's really interesting. Then you have these here. Now this universal character comes in. The hive mind will always transition, and so here he goes behind the tree, and that kind of works as the lens shift, and then comes out as another character. So puts on another suit, shifts into another, I call it, now after watching Dr. Wolfram's lectures, kind of shifts into another, it's like I call it a rural lens shift, shifting the lens in the rural space. So kind of taking a different slice, a different perspective, and seeing what it looks like from there. Then in this one, you get this sense that space and time are lenses that are put on things. So this is talking about taking a certain space and mentally saturating with time. So this is getting into the subway, and this character sitting down in the subway and remembering a number of interactions that he's had over time in the subway, and is seeing himself like, oh, here he is chasing the girl, and then like, but here he is now, drinking with another girl, and there he is with a different girl, and these are all kind of piling up together. So it's flattening space and time together, and that's like by putting the two lenses together, you're kind of seeing them all at once and shifting your awareness from the present to like a more flattened out context of time. And I think that's really interesting. This one here, they're pretty suggestive. This one seems to me to be a shift in health. You're obviously shifting into another character, but you're also like taking off the head, you're trimming up. Actually, I think it's the same character. You have the same character. He just gets a haircut. He gets an update. He gets some things chipped off. So now that he's been made healthy again, that's going to be another lens shift. Like when you're in poor health, the world looks different to you. Same happens with mood, right? Like if you're on a happy day, like all of the sun and the birds and stuff sounds great. If you're in a bad mood, it can seem gray outside, even though it's bright sunny day. You're just not taking it in. And that's a concept I first became familiar with in a class on Heidegger, reading the first half of Being in Time, that there's this idea of world, and that you can kind of occupy many different worlds. And that's where I think it's a healthier interpretation of the multiverse too, is that not that these are all separate things that kind of exist adjacent to each other that you could hop through, but that they are all present, all here. It's just lens shifts. We're just not having access to these different worlds. And some of that is just like, I will never see the world from like your point of view because I can't shift into your perspective. So you live in an entirely different world than me. And that's something that I got from Heidegger. Also Heidegger and that idea of worlds, my professor, Hubert Dreyfus, he was one of the early people to make the argument that machine learning was going to have to be done through neural nets and embedded experience in data and environments, that you could never just pre-program it because it needed to have an embeddedness in a world. So I think one of the reasons we're getting these large language models like ChatGPT and things like Midjourney is because you're now at least able to sufficiently embed them in a world of one type of data. And as the AIs have more and more lenses connected, you have a visual lens and a brain lens, both in the same AI, they're going to get more and more sophisticated. So that note about multiverses and AI from Heidegger might be some of what's behind this book. It seems very Heideggerian to me, but I think it also dovetails, even though this is an older book. Let's see when it was published. Oh, that's probably going to be in the back. Even though this is an older book, I think it gets what's going on with AI right now really, really right. I don't see the date. I don't know. We'll keep looking for it though. So anyways, we have the health now, and he's going on a nocturnal ambulation and assessing the city here, and his skin awakens with contact with the air. The light makes him delirious, and his gaze pierces the landscape. So there's environmental data now that's saturating through the landscape, and then again allowing him a moment of pareidolia, like the shapes and the shadows and stuff is allowing his imagination to map some of the interior onto the exterior. And that's a kind of interesting shift. And here you're talking about a perceptual shift, that the shadows come to life. They're no longer this flattened thing, that it's no longer a human that's a shadow that comes alive. It is an actual shadow, but because of that previous experience with shadows here as another character, and I think actually we jump into this character's body, it seems like, that here you're able to then extrapolate from the actual two-dimensional shadow a sense of three-dimensionality, and so you can then context shift on purpose. And then here there's this imaginative shift, again based on silhouettes, playing hide and seek with the building's facade, and then we flip to the other side and see what's actually going on. So there is like a spatial lens flip, right? You've preserved time, but you've just kind of stepped out of space, and you can see. Now I know Alan Moore talks about that a lot. You can kind of see through the building and understand it from the other side. So another lens shift. Then we get another like personality shift in general, and this is just now shifting days, like waking up as a different person on a different day. So yeah, when you wake up, like you're still the same person, but you went to bed, you've hit a reset button, it's a new day, there's new tasks to do. You kind of enter into a new level of abstraction, like for that day, and you're constantly shifting. So here, then, this was already, like I said, most of these notes I was putting in as I was reading. And we get here, the metro, a shifting space in Paris's subterranean realm. So I think this idea of perspective shifts maybe is obviously the point of the book and very explicit. My idea of like this data lens flips, I don't know that Victor Hussenot was thinking about, but it speaks to me. And then on entering, we are faced with two contradictory feelings, the unknown and the familiar. So the space itself, the shapes, the benches, how the whole system works is familiar, but the people in it are different every time. So those are shifts. The people around you create shifts in the environment, and then that also creates emotional shifts. And like I said, that those things can affect how you view the world. So you see here, he's in different places in the bus. There's different people. He's having different concerns. There's different. At each new station, new passengers enter and subtly reshape an environment. So there's spatial rearrangement shifts, and each one of those creates a new view on the world and is a new kind of possible reality. And I guess you could have a theory of the multiverse where this person stepped over here rather than here, and you shift it. But if you really start thinking about all the different people's viewpoints, I think you can think about the multiverse in that way. It seems healthier and more interesting to me, and I think this book does a good job of that. Also, like gaze shifts, holding someone's gaze or looking away is a different type of shift that either lets someone into your lens or like keeps someone out. You can also like assert your lens on someone, right? Like you can really capture their attention, and like I'm doing right now, I'm interpreting something, so I am trying to communicate to you from behind my filters and pass through your filters and catch your gaze and shift your lens to some extent. And they're talking about that happening. So, I mean, you can see how genius this book is, that it's like just like one sentence and a few pictures, and I can extrapolate all of that. Hopefully I'll get to interview Victor Hussenot and see if I'm way over interpreting this or not, but I find it hard to believe with all this talk about shifts and stuff in the content itself. And then here I think we're talking about a visualization of like a value shift, that this deep value that you hold in your heart, that you've communicated it to someone else, and they can go about their life with that value shift. Here they're talking a bit about shifts in mood, like what puts you in a good mood? Do you really know? I'm not sure. And then they're saying, I like to walk through the city at dusk and see what my imagination comes up with. So that plays back into kind of some of the earlier ones where you can engage in pareidolia and have those imaginative shifts that allow you to morph the space around you. So that's another way that you can understand the universes or the multiverses, that it's not actual places. And there's an argument in philosophy about the word actual, whether it's indexical, which means the one you're in is here, or whether it's just possibilities that don't become actual. I'm on the side of it's possibilities that don't get actualized. That actual being actual is like when the computation plays out and it says these are all the possible outcomes, and then this is the one that's now been observed and made actual. It becomes actual. I don't think there are any other multiverses to get into as actual spaces. I think it's just potentials, and you can imagine your way through those potentials. So those things still exist, just not in like the Marvel movie sense where you could actually have someone come over. And then here he's talking about having these imaginations. He's talking about this city that he's imagined, that's always something that he's looking for. You know, there's a beguiling back street full of charm, a wide avenue, cold and austere, a banal street like so many others, you know, just kind of endlessly chasing this ideal. Does the place I'm searching for in this maze of a city really exist? And that's interesting too, because the ideals that you hold, this thing that you believe you can get to, can, you know, it's a lens that you're forcing on yourself. Like I've gone with my brother and his wife boot shopping, I remember really clearly, and she kept describing this boot, you know, this exact boot, and we'd get boots that were so close, but it like the sewing on it didn't match what was in her mind or something. So this ideal that we hold, whether it be a utopian society or an ideal partner or anything, is a lens that we can force over ourselves, which interprets the world around us, helps us in imagination, pushes it forward, but also, you know, can hold us back. You know, like if we never reach the ideal, that can make us unhappy. So I think there's just a bunch of like life lessons in here that are really good. This next rural lens shift here, I think, is a status shift. Like, right, you've won the lottery now, and now you've got more money, so you've shifted into a different part of society, and that's going to change your lenses. And then this story here is all about the exchange of goods and the perceived value of resources. You know, that to one person a resource may not mean so much, but to another person, you know, like it could mean everything. And then also, like here, you have this character that ostensibly, as far as I can tell, is pretty wealthy, and she's got this coin that she really, you know, she was buying some bread and got this coin back, and the coin doesn't seem to be very interesting to her in terms of its monetary value, but it's the journey that the coin went through. And so the way that an object can accumulate kind of alternate possible worlds, or go through kind of different people's worlds and the view that they have on them. So in the shift of the provenance, the shift of hands, the perceived worth changes. Like you have this super rich guy here who very casually is just like, oh, here, you know, have some money. But to this guy, it means everything. And then, you know, to this girl, it's ended up in an international star's handbag, and like, you know, she didn't really care about it, and so she kind of just gives it to a random fan, and, you know, it makes its way around the world. And its value, it's the level of abstraction that it exists in changes depending on the person. Like to the bum is operating in the level of abstraction of monetary worth. To this girl, she's engaging with it at the level of abstraction where it's perceived as like narrative worth. And so those are different lenses that are put on there, and that she's enjoying imagining. And then she says, in vain I tried to make sense of its reappearance. So she's trying to say, why did this thing that's narratively important to me show up with back up into my life? And that's where it's more narratively valuable to her. She says, with no rational explanation, I decided to let it go and slip the coin into my purse. So she shifted her perception of it. Like, I can't figure this out. So she shifted it back into she found no narrative worth in the end. So she shifted her goal, or she shifted her lens, and it just became money again that she'll spend. And it's just, you know, there's this constant, it's so smart how this book does this. Here, I think, you know, someone's been released. This looks like a character dying to me, you know, that the soul stepped out and the body collapses, and it didn't inhabit anyone else. Now it's back kind of abstractly watching. And so you get this removed view now that there's no character being inhabited, but the metro flies above Paris, sailing against the wind, its own rattling rhythm. It is the Parisians' ephemeral and shifting home. So again, you're seeing explicitly in the dialogue this sense of shifts. And then you go here above their head, it travels through the ages. So now we're talking about time shifts, and that's why this character has stepped out and is perceiving from a more universal context now. And that there's objects within our life that are more permanent and persistent than we are. And so like that coin, they accumulate value. And I wrote a note called Memetic Survival. It is a radiant imprint is indelible, that sometimes ideas or symbols last longer than us. That's a successful meme, right? In the original sense of Richard Dawkins, not the way that, like, the memes that we pass around now are the weakest memes. You forget them. But these things that become powerful, permanent symbols, and you see this is the shape of a head here. And so it's like this idea that is so overwhelming that it kind of helps us build our lens. If you live in Paris, this is such an ever-present thing that it's forced itself upon your mind and the minds of most of the people around you, which is why you've gone into that universal context. And then here you have like an empty head that gets possessed again by this universal. And we go to rhythm and pulse. And so this is things flickering off and on. I really like this part too, because it's just talking to the idea of data and computation in the universe. This is binary, right? It's off and on. There's something there or it's not there. Like the opposite of nothing is something. And as soon as you have nothing, you automatically, as a logical consequence, have something. So existence is just necessary. You don't need existence to be made. It's just a necessary of the binary of nothing and something. And then it's talking about the ever dependable presence reassures me. And it just goes on to have like this lights blinking off and on, and they can be different lights. And then you start to get these lights switching on and off, and you start to see, you get like a binary pattern here. I'd be really interested to see like if in ASCII or something, if this says anything, or if Victor Hussenot just picked it at random. I'm not a coder. I understand these things philosophically, but like the mathematical part of it as a coder, I couldn't interpret this. So anyone that does know how to interpret ASCII or whatever, is there a message encoded in here? Is this Morse code or anything like that? Would be interesting. But then after going and kind of showing the binary idea underlying reality, it says, to witness the whole performance, you must stay awake until dawn. And that's just, I took it as you must observe from a lens. Like you have a window on the world, and you've got to stay awake, and you've got to pay attention, and you've got to observe through your window as much as you can, because this, again, is a character staring out their window at other people's windows. And all of these offs and ons are other realities. There are other worlds, there are other viewpoints, there are other rule sets computing out, but you can only interact with them from behind your windows. And then here we have changing lenses is changing channels. So you get a character that's flipping the channels. Now we got this character let loose, and we have an experience where you have two strangers looking out over the city from nearly the same viewpoint. They're observing the metro, which we've just learned is kind of a persistent icon for most people in Paris. And they're sitting there, and they're talking about a perspectival shift here, that they're both seeing it from slightly different but intersecting visions. And then they go on to show, Hussenot goes on to show that these two characters have had a similar life as well, that they are not spatially close, but they are close in the rural data, that their patterns in their life have played out pretty similarly. And so even though spatially they're not usually close, in the Ruliad, which is what Stephen Wolfram calls it, in the Ruliad, this space of all possible computations, there's a lot of overlap in their data Venn diagrams, basically. And that's not a spatial relationship. It would be, I would think, called rural closeness in the Ruliad on some kind of other spectrum. It's like there's a lot of things in the world that are red that aren't spatially close to each other, but they're close on the redness or whatever. So you have these two characters whose lives have been very similar. They're both into comics. They both like Tintin and Spirou, but then one likes Robinson and Crusoe, and the other one likes Blake and Mortimer. They both really, really like music and have two friends that they'll sit around smoking pot with, but one's listening to Bowie, Beatles, Stones, and the other one's listening to Dre, Wu-Tang, Eminem. So they both like music, but they like different music. And then this character over here dates this girl. She breaks up with him and actually meets this guy. While he's heartbroken, they go on to have a good relationship, and then she leaves him as well, and he's also heartbroken. So they both wind up here on the same bench in the same city, kind of both in the same emotional state. they got to the emotional state later, but you see all of those overlaps in their data sets and how that forms very similar perspectives but slightly different. And this is called parallel perspectives, and Hussenot says that tonight, much like their lives, their perspectives are parallel. So you can have like these, that's another multiverse thing, right? Like they kind of played out the same story but with minor variations, and they even kind of come to each other, but they're totally divided. As always, you don't have epistemic access to each other. They could talk about it. So it's just another one of those things with like such few words, so much is being said. Here's a memetic transfer. An idea gains new info from kind of occupying a new head. So you have this universal character here jumps into this character's head, and by entering that new perspective, that idea is going to kind of be reprocessed. So the meme, the idea version of a genetic, it's going to go get some new genetic material, and this character could spread it to somebody else, and it may have like a piece taken away or a piece added to it. Like I'm doing that again, right, with this book. Like I'm sure the way I'm interpreting this is not exactly what the author meant, but there is some transfer of ideas there, and then it's cross-pollinated and tainted with my thoughts and the fact that I've been listening to Steve Wolfren over the last 2 days. So that's playing out here. Then they get onto a train, and arriving at each new station is exciting as drawing a card in a poker game. A new platform appears, and a new deal of there's a new deal of the cards. So each one of these is again like a quantum possibility. You could get off at any train. You could have a good relationship maybe with any one of these 3 girls. It's just, the one that you get off the train and talk to potentially. Or maybe you talk to the one and you get your heart broken, you talk to the other one and it's the love of your life. This one, like, oh, they opened the door and a guy showed up. Like this, you wouldn't get a date with, you would get a date with her. This, oops, there's a dude that shows up and it's her boyfriend. So that's really interesting. And then it says each is full of promise, but is the one we really need still hidden in the deck. And to me, that's the horror of the metaverse. And if you live your life thinking that there's an infinite possible, like here, there's infinite possible potential to meet someone just slightly better than who you're with, that's a devastating psychological consequence to that. You'll never be happy. You'll never be content with anything. You're going to ruin all your relationships just for the hope that maybe there's one slightly better. And same with the multiverse. There may be a reality that's out there that's better. I think it's much healthier to think about it like this book is, that it's a bunch of lens shifts, and you can shift your own lenses through a lot of the kind of lens shift strategies shown in this book. But don't go chasing that endlessly either. That could be really bad. Here's a material shift, like a material is passing away and kind of becoming some other material. And then that's talked about in the story, that measured against our lifetime, the stuff of cities seems fixed and eternal, but being built by man, it too, like him, will perish in the end. So our perception of materials can impact our life. And then also he says that measured against our lifetime, all matter, whether living or inert, is a mirror. And it's a mirror because the way that we interpret any of the data or any of the materials shows more about our interpretive lenses or our interpretive filters than it does necessarily about the material objects. I mean, obviously you can see the city decaying and nature growing and dying, but also those things are relative to our values, right? Like maybe as the city dies, nature can come back. There's different value sets that come with each lens. And so the mirror aspect is really interesting. And then right here it says, after each of us, the world remains. But I think also it collects weight, right? Like the material picks up weight because in the data set about that object, there is the collection of all the thoughts that have been had about it. And I think that persists. And so I would call that like rural weight. It's collecting more data about that particular thing in the Ruliad. More information is being processed, the things being seen through more different lenses. That's a better, richer, more real understanding of the thing over time, I guess. And then here you have we leave the material, so we jump out of this and we're now like kind of sapped of materiality. And this character goes again like on a train and is again messing with space and time, but in this time it's memory. That memory is connecting space and time kind of in a loop. And so if you have oneself return to the same space over and over again, it's encountering itself in a different way, like seeing itself from different perspectives, looking back at when you were a kid. So you have him encounter himself basically as a kid, and think back on that and see yourself from different perspective, different lenses. It's easier to look back than it is to look forward. And then here in that you have an ideal shift. So as you get older, and you do go through changes, you will shift ideals. So you see this character here moves forward and is either changing his ideals or remembering being a kid. And then you have this space-time loop again, but you take the self and you shift it to a different place. So he's remembering back when he was a kid and how that influenced his value set and how that influenced his changes. And then you see that there is a this old man in this place that he could swear it's the same person he's been seeing. And that gets really complicated as well, where you've got the cartoon brain, and the cartoon brain just learns old man and just kind of puts old man in. So you're seeing that with the silhouette, that you're not seeing the details, you're kind of seeing the archetype that they fill. And so he's always seeing this old man on the bench at different times, but it's not necessarily the old man, it's just that there's an old man on a bench, and that's the most that his brain ever registered. That's as much made it past his filters. And then you go to like all of the characters, it looks like, I'm not sure in this one, but this looks like all of the characters throughout the book that we've seen so far. And it's showing this idea of evolution of values over time as the lenses change. It says there's 3 stages in our life. So childhood, and in childhood, all the pieces are very apart. You're very solipsistic. You're really stuck behind your own lens. You haven't been socialized yet or any of that. Then as you move to be an adult, you get more connected, you get more socialized, you're more integrated into the weave of things. And you'll also start to see that there's more of those overlaps in the Ruliad, where the data Venn diagrams overlap. So you have these 2 characters both have like an older person walking away from them. You have like the kids playing in a lot of these. The characters grow up and have kids. You start to have resonances through the other stories. You're seeing this same story of that guy stealing the other guy's girlfriend from maybe this guy's lens here and this guy's lens here, because like we're in his world. Actually, this is his world because it's red and they're walking away, and this is their world and he's in it. So you're getting all of these kind of perspective shifts all in this more interconnected web here. But everyone's involved, they're plugged in, but there's still a sense of individuality in the individual lenses. And then as you're getting older, you're getting more integrated, more accumulated to your environment, more assimilated, and the barriers dissolve. And I think this is a really beautiful idea, that as you go, like, you don't have to be fighting for self anymore. And so all of those old bitternesses and things that separate you kind of keep you apart, and you just want to sit in your environment and be more ingrained and feed the birds and, you know, listen to the dogs at the park and watch the trees. And that dissolution of self over age into a more total environment, I think, is a really beautiful concept that's put in these 3, you know, again, seemingly simple but very complex pages. And then saying also that in turn each of us will kind of go through these roles. We're going to cycle through it, and that these things, you know, will change. Only the closest to us, our friends and family, really change. We immediately notice the tiniest differences in them. They jump out at us, they disconcert us. So like you're just changing your haircut, you seem like a very different person. But when you're talking about those archetypal things, you know, those people don't change. You don't notice that it's an entirely different person on the bench because you're not really familiar with them. So these things are relative to your experience as well. You know, you'll notice really minor shifts in certain people because you're familiar and you have a lot of context. And in other contexts, you are just mapping in the silhouettes. And so I like this also. It says, the strangers we encounter in our lives seem timeless, forever fixed in their roles. And that's true. That we only see them in that one moment, and so they can only be occupied by the cartoon brain. It's like something I face every semester. You know, you go into a classroom and you're supposed to like not like have any pre-biases or anything, but like how am I supposed to see a name that's like a obviously Vietnamese name on a roll sheet and not look for the one Vietnamese kid in the class? Like, I don't know anything about them. They're not a person yet. It's just that I get to know them as I talk to them, but that's how you make that immediate snap judgment. It's not always the best thing, but it happens. And I don't know how you would avoid that. Like, you need to have those maps of like mental ideas about things to navigate the world, so you know what's a tree and you don't walk into the tree, you walk through the door. But anyways, this lesson is being learned, and once this lesson is learned, now the character is transferred into the old man on the bench, and he's able to take the head off. And this character has then learned this lesson about like assumption and perspective and all of this. Like, as they've gotten to the end of their life, they've had those barriers dissolve, and now they're ready to enter the kind of the collective human perspective. And so you see here this character takes the clothes off, walks past all of the kind of viewpoints that it's inhabited, and that becomes the collective human experience. And you have all these projections now, where instead of sucking the world in, you're able to like project that knowledge back out. And the collective vision forms an expanding beam of light. Man questions the world and it answers the riddles, forcing him to continue searching for unattainable truths. And this goes into the quantum logic that I was talking about. And I love this visual for it, that you're basically kind of causing a binary again. And that binary is both splitting and unifying these things. But these things could be seen like as logic gates, almost splitting. And I like the rhythm of it and all of that. And then also something that really was just made clear to me by watching these Stephen Wolfram videos is the idea of computational irreducibility. That there's some programs that, given the beginning of the program, you can speculate what the end is, and that's what science is trying to find rule sets that we can use to predict the outcome at the beginning. But he was explaining that there's plenty of rule sets that are computationally irreducible. You have to run them to see where they go. So for instance, you could have a program that just has a random factor in it, and it just like makes a grid and randomly places colors in the grid. Because there's a random pull in there, you can't predict what it's going to pull. You can't look at the rule set and predict what that final grid will look like. The only thing you can do is run the program. And also that final grid couldn't be explained by the program. So you couldn't run the same program again and get the same grid. You would get a different grid every time because it's randomized. So there's a difference between, this is called Kamgarov complexity, but the computational complexity to achieve the result versus the computational complexity to exactly verbatim repeat the result are quite different. The complexity to make the rule could be very, very simple, but the complexity to actually exactly recreate that, you'd have to go and specify, because it's 100% random. You'd have to specify this color here, this color here, this color here. And so the program to recreate it is much bigger than the program that created it in the beginning state. And that's very interesting to me, because it really changes your view of reality. Not everything can be explained by science. And also you just realize that these things do have to play out, and it gives you a different sense of time, that things have to be being computed, and that computation could be done, but you could be bound. The computation could be done and forever present, but you're bound by your perception of this slice of the computation playing out. So I don't think, again, that there's necessarily multiverse, but that these computations were just kind of stuck at whatever part in observing how the possibilities actualize. So I think that's visually pretty well represented here with these almost logic gates breaking and closing down together. And then the end result that they come up with in the book is exactly the right answer, that our ability as observers is to create, that it's our duty to go out and observe use our lenses to make the world meaningful, because otherwise it's a meaningless universe. And that can be, you can see that in two ways. You could go like, really nihilistic with it, and nothing means anything. Or you can say, hey, look, we have an infinitely interpretable canvas that we'll never reach the end of because it's computationally irreducible, and there's infinite possible rules that could be playing out in infinite possible ways. And it also solved the idea for me that, like I said at the beginning, I've always worried that entering the hive mind seems like the utopian state, because there's no conflict there. If we're all one mind, we can't have conflict. It's because we have these different lenses that we have different value sets and different needs, and we're in conflict. And so if you get rid of that, you have a utopian world. But then you've entered the hive mind, and you're no longer there to enjoy it, as an individual. So I've always been very wary of that. But this is kind of painting a different, interesting picture that we can the more that we can put these perspectives together, it would be beneficial to a hive mind to still maintain a variety of individual perspectives with varying, flipping, rotating lenses. So that gives me hope that there is a way forward for unifying ourselves in a hive mind that still preserves the value of the individual, so the individual's still there to enjoy it, but that we're kind of collectively working together in a more unified, coordinated way in our collection of data. I don't know how that would, are basically intentionally shifting our filters in a way that's useful to all of us. And I think that's the hope for where AI can go, is that the AI provides different filters and different reasons to, kind of find more interesting patterns and rules out there that we can't perceive and make them relevant to us. But I really, really like the suggestion that the preservation of the individual is actually preferable to the hive. I don't know practically how we'd manage that, but I feel like I have more of an answer, at least conceptually, by the end of the book than I did in the previous 20 years of thinking about this. So really powerful book. And then in terms of like memetic transfer, I think this is genius in that this character now has gone and taken off his cloak. And basically now you are the collective conscious. You are the lens. The book has passed these ideas on to you. I've passed them on to you in the video, and you're now more aware of it, and you're part of it. You're it's jumped out of this suit and it's in you now. And so now it's behind your lens. And then at the end, I had to write that this is a fucking brilliant book. I really, really think this is one of the smartest books I've ever read. I see nothing in here that says what year it was published. I see no indicia. Oh, here we go, 2015. Yeah, so this has been out for a long, long time. Definitely pre the idea of the Ruliad. So this is, I'm assuming that there's a lot of Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty and the phenomenologists behind this. This seems very driven by the philosophy of phenomenology. Husserl, Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty. I had a professor, Alvin Noe, and also my professor, Herbert Dreyfus, were both very much into this stuff. So I'm pretty familiar with that. And this seems saturated in phenomenology to me, and also kind of Nietzsche's perspectivism as well. But I think it coincides really, really nicely with the Stephen Wolfram stuff and the idea of the Rulia that I've been looking at, and how that plays into where we're headed with the AI. It's another one of those books where you just like, it feels like it landed on my lap on the exact right day, on the exact right hour. So I could not thank Nobrow more for publishing this. I cannot celebrate Victor Hussenot more. This is one of the best, most genius, smart, intelligent, wise, clever, succinct, like so much said with so little. I can't imagine. So I've seen that Victor Hussenot has done a lot more stuff. I've got one more book on the way. Nothing else has been translated. I'm hoping they're all this good. I can't imagine making a book this good and the rest not being that good. So this is an artist I'm very, very high on, a book that obviously I'm ecstatic about. Please go buy it. Hopefully we can get more translations of Victor Hussenot stuff. And I'm going to do my best to try and get an interview with Victor. I don't even know if he seems like he's probably Parisian, or at least French, so hopefully there's not a language barrier there. But this is an artist I'd love to talk to, so we'll see. Definitely get yourself a copy of this book, coming out in 2015 in this nice hardcover. It's probably just all used copies now, so grab a copy early. if you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel, you enjoy being exposed to books like this, these deep analyses of the books like this, there's two ways to support what we're doing. The first one is through our Patreon. We have 2 different tiers of interaction on there. The first tier gets you exclusive early access to our videos. So books like this, you know, that probably won't go up on the channel for a while, that maybe be out there and harder to get a copy of, you'd see videos of them earlier. Then in the second tier, you get all that, plus you get voting rights in our Pranay Day web experiment comic, so you can help determine how Pranay lives his Groundhog Day each time he goes through it, and you know, help that story evolve, as well as get exclusive previews, early looks at the graphic novels that Sean and I are making, our personal artworks. Any of the money that we get from that helps us buy the books that we review, so keep exposing you to new work and making the reviews that we make. That's much appreciated. Try and turn that back into the industry. And then the second way to support us is the best way to support Living the Line itself, and that's to support what Sean's doing with Living the Line books. So we'll go ahead and take a look at one of his projects now.
Whole new world. 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 For you and
Thanks for following along. Take it away, Jack.
You want to see all these books? Smash that subscribe button and the like button and the bell, and then you get them.